I started learning Japanese 20 years ago, and along the way, I made some mistakes that held me back more than I realized. And these weren't things you could just fix by memorizing more words or studying harder. They were fundamental mistakes in how I approached the language itself. And today, I want to break down the 4 biggest mistakes that were holding me back and what finally helped me move forward. Okay, so probably the biggest mistake that I made was avoiding speaking for years. I kept telling myself I'll just start speaking when I feel ready. I thought I need more words, more input, more practice before I could comfortably start speaking, but that's not how it works. It's a bit of a paradox. You only feel ready to speak after you've already been speaking for a while. So if you don't feel ready now, you probably never will until you actually start practicing. It's kind of like being your own worst employer. You're refusing to hire yourself for the job of speaking because your mental job posting demands experience that you can't get without giving yourself the job first. Speaking is the experience that qualifies you for more speaking. I remember the first time I really tried to speak Japanese without overthinking it in full conversations, and it was a total mess, like tons of mistakes, awkward sentences, terrible pronunciation, and that's exactly what I needed. Like, those mistakes are the process. Waiting didn't protect me from anything except maybe a little bit of short-term anxiety. It only delayed progress that I could have been making years earlier. You see, speaking forces you to actually use what you've learned. When you're only reading or listening, it's easy to trick yourself into thinking you understand. When you have to actually produce the language on your own, you quickly realize what you know versus what you only recognize. Now, I do think you should get plenty of input through immersion before fully diving into speaking, and this is going to help your brain get comfortable with grammar patterns, the rhythm of the language, and how the language actually sounds. But don't wait until you feel ready, because I'll tell you from experience that time never comes. Alright, so while we're on the topic of immersion, I want to talk about something closely related: context. Let me give you an example. I used to spend hours and hours memorizing long lists of isolated words, thinking that I could rapidly expand my vocabulary that way. At first it felt efficient, but what actually happened was I just got good at recalling definitions and not real understanding. I thought for sure just by adding more words to my mental dictionary would make listening and reading so much easier. I mean, it seems logical. The more words that I learn, the more I understand, right? Well, not exactly. Here's the problem. Memorizing words in isolation builds shallow recognition, not real understanding. When you study a word by itself, you only learn the surface meaning, the kind that you would find in the dictionary. But grammar isn't made of isolated pieces. Every word interacts with others, and its meaning can shift depending on tone, grammar, and situation. Context shows you those relationships. It teaches you how a word behaves and not just what it means. You start to notice which words naturally pair together, what sounds polite or rude, and how the entire meaning of a word itself can change based on how it's used. I remember trying to use some advanced words that I learned from some JLPT vocab lists, probably around the time that I was preparing for the N2. I thought it would make my Japanese sound better, but I only ended up just sounding very stiff and unnatural, and sometimes completely wrong. But later I began to realize that the important thing about vocabulary isn't about how many words you know, it's about how well you know them. Because you don't truly know a word until you've seen it used naturally in many contexts over and over again. When I finally started reading books, articles, listening to podcasts, and having real conversations, that is when everything started to come together. I wasn't just memorizing definitions anymore, I was learning through real exposure. I'd come across a word in context and see how it's used and what it was paired with, and I'd naturally just start remembering it without even forcing it. And that's because my brain was finally making connections. And I think that's why immersion is so powerful, because it doesn't just teach you what words mean, it teaches you how they are naturally used in real Japanese. Alright, so this next one affected me more than I expected. I'd see other learners who spoke faster or more fluently than me, and it made me feel behind, but what I didn't realize at the time was that I had skills that they didn't. You see, everyone's path is different, and just because someone's ahead of you in one area doesn't mean you're behind overall. Comparing yourself can take away your confidence, it can make learning feel less enjoyable, and blind you to your very own progress. So I had this one friend in particular, and we've been learning Japanese for the exact same amount of time, and I remember a few years ago I heard him speak Japanese, and he sounded very natural, like much more than me, and it made me feel like I was just not good at the language because we've been learning for the exact same amount of time. But then we were trying to read the same news article, and I noticed he was struggling with kanji that was super easy for me, and that's when I realized that we were both focused on two different things. He prioritized speaking and I prioritized reading. Like, neither of us was better at Japanese, we just had different strengths. You see, the problem with comparing yourself to others is that you're often comparing your weakest area to their strongest area. Like, you're not seeing the things that they struggle with that you might be good at. You also don't know someone's actual situation. Like, maybe they lived in Japan, or maybe they study 4 hours a day while you're only studying 30 minutes. You're seeing the result without actually knowing the process and then feeling discouraged because you're not there yet. So yeah, I wish I'd focused more on my own growth instead, comparing myself to where I was 6 months ago instead of to other people. Okay, so finally, there's a trap of thinking that test scores can lead to fluency. I always did well in the JLPT. I could recognize tons of kanji, I could read complex text, but that didn't mean I could actually communicate naturally. It just meant that I could pass the JLPT. And this is because tests are predictable and real language is messy. Fluency doesn't care about your test scores. It's about being able to use the language naturally and confidently in any situation. And the JLPT especially has this limitation because it doesn't test speaking at all. Like, you can pass the N2 or even the N1 and still struggle to have a basic conversation. You see, people get good at test taking strategies. Like, they know how to eliminate wrong answers, they can read complex passages and answer comprehension questions. But if you put them in a real conversation, they struggle. And that was me for many years, even at the N1 level. It's funny because when I was a beginner, I honestly thought that I'd be fluent by the time I reached the N1 level, but that didn't happen. It's an easy trap to fall into. Like, when you're starting out, I think it's very normal to just assume that passing the highest level means that you basically mastered the language. I mean, if you can handle that much grammar and vocabulary, how could you not be fluent, right? But what I learned is that tests can be good for some things, like having a goal to work towards or measuring specific progress. And sometimes you actually need the certification for a job or school. But if you're aiming for, let's say, N2 and you pass it, like, that's a real achievement. That's not nothing. It means that your listening and reading have reached a pretty high level. But you still need to actively use the language, like watch authentic Japanese content, talk to people, read about things that you care about in Japanese. If you can do that consistently for years, that's how you're going to build fluency, not by acing a test. Okay, so looking back, all these mistakes were connected. It wasn't about learning more grammar or vocabulary. It was about how I actually used the language and the mindset that I brought to it. Avoiding speaking, studying words in isolation, comparing myself to others, and thinking that tests meant fluency. And they all held me back in different ways. But once I changed my mindset in how I approached those things, that's when I started to see real progress. My sentences got smoother, my confidence grew, and conversations became much more enjoyable. And that feeling of actually using the language is one of my biggest breakthroughs in 20 years of learning Japanese.